I'm Gordon Brickell from Filmmaker U. At Filmmaker U, we create courses for film professionals to deepen and diversify your existing skill set. You can learn more at filmmakeru.com and also check out our social media at filmmaker_u on Twitter. And make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel and check off the notification bell to see our videos weekly. Every week, we interview a film professional to discuss their work, and this was made possible by OWC. For more information about how they can assist you in your filmmaking needs, go to owcdigital.com. And this week, I'm joined by editor, director, writer, producer Jessica Brunetto, whose work includes, as an editor, Broad City, Awkwafina is Nora in Queens, and the new HBO hit Hacks, for which you were just recently nominated for an Emmy. Welcome to the show, Jessica.
Thank you for having me.
Now, before we get into Hacks,
Yeah.
I do have to ask you about American Vandal.
Okay, please.
One of my favorite sort of mockumentaries, I guess you could say. What was your involvement with that? How did you get involved with that?
At the time, the creators were looking for an editor who could balance between documentary and comedy. And it was the production company was also Funny or Die, who I did Feral Takes the Field with. So they sort of already were familiar with my work and my abilities. So I believe I was their first choice as the pilot editor. And that project, it was really special to me in the sense of, in the edit room, we really shaped the performances, and a lot of the scripted material was beat out by the improvised material from the actors, and it just felt more real to us and more true to a documentary. And I think that a lot of the debate in the edit room was like, how can we make this feel as real as possible? So I think for a narrative project, and like achieving that tone was really special.
Yeah, well, I mean, my favorite part is just watching it and being like, they're talking about drawing dicks on a whiteboard. And they
Yeah.
into a 12 part or whatever, however many parts. It was just so great. How it seems that a lot of your work is in comedy. Were you interested in stand-up or that type of thing, or how did you get into comedy?
It weirdly snuck up on me. I feel like in a lot of ways it chose me. When I was a film student at SUNY Purchase, I was very interested in documentary filmmaking and projects with a lot of social commentary. So out of college, I was, really wanted to work on some pretty heavy stuff, like material and content wise. And I got lucky in the sense that I fell into a couple of projects working with Michael Moore. And what I began to realize is a lot of my job was taking this very serious content and stories and then trying to make them funny. Because his whole approach was, it's going to resonate with the audience, these facts, these stories, if we can make the audience laugh. And that's what they're going to remember more than just, shouting at them about what's right and what's wrong and all these things. And it's kind of like that old saying of like, a spoonful of sugar helps the medicine go down. That's like literally what I learned from him. And I realized over time that those are the kinds of projects I gravitate towards personally. So I can still kind of go after being an artist that has something to say, or working with other artists that have something to say. But we work in entertainment, right? So it has to be an enjoyable ride as you're building these things, as you're editing these things. And at the end of my Capitalism, a Love Story, which was the last project I worked on with Michael, I just realized that, I really just enjoy the comedy aspect, the laughing all day. I mean, how lucky am I that people pay me to laugh at work all day? I mean, that is so special. And So from there, I really got lucky and was able to springboard into improv comedy shows like Delocated by John Glazer. And they were very much looking for documentary editors who could sculpt scenes in the edit, because they shot a ton of improv all the time. And then from there, I just continued to grow and focus my career in comedy.
I'd like to ask you a question about working with Michael.
Yeah.
Um, Whenever I watch his films, what fascinates me is it feels like whatever it takes to communicate the story is his approach. How do you structure one of his films? Because like it feels like at one moment it might be cinema verite, the next moment it's voiceover, the next moment it's this, but it still comes together. Like it's not, I'm not talking badly about it. I'm wondering
Yeah.
how do you work with him to structure this story?
I mean, it's a very long trial and error process. He is very lucky to have a lot of resources at his disposal. So it's kind of like any idea he has or producers have, or it comes from the editors and he likes it, he'll try it. And so a lot of it is building, these smaller pieces that you then, I mean, we would have story meetings almost every single day and have basically what we called the board, which was a huge cork board of index cards with all the scenes and all, what we were perceiving it to be. Like, this could be act one, this could be act two, this could be act three. And it would literally just be hours sometimes of us talking and rearranging index cards versus just like editing, editing, editing. And so once we all would decide on, let's try it this way, then it's like you break apart, you disperse, and you put the film together in that way. Um, and, sometimes that also means like going back to the dailies for the interview footage. Like, maybe this character shouldn't be talking about this story point. Didn't they say that funny thing or that interesting thing about this instead? So it's also, you're constantly revisiting the dailies, the interviews, but, you watch. I always think of my documentary career as like the scene in A Clockwork Orange where he's just strapped in a chair, like watching endless footage. It's like you ingest so much
I,
um, working on those projects.
it's funny that you would say that because the first project I edited was a doc, and it was hours and hours of like someone building something, and it was just like, and then they would like sit there for a second to think, and you're like watching them think, and you're like,
Yeah,
that could be useful.
you
But,
never know.
you
and
know,
and that's the thing about documentary too. It's like, I've pulled shots from before they clap the slate a
mhm.
hundred times, and there are just like little real moments and gems in there that are so usable. And it's just about having a lot of patience, about being willing to rebuild things, being willing to take a step back. I mean, there are huge things that happen, like in Sicko there, which I was an assistant and a graphic designer on, but I got to edit a lot on it, which is how I got my big break on Capitalism, a Love Story. However, on Sicko, the huge cut we made like a year in was, we have to take the pharmaceutical industry stories out of this movie. That this is a movie about health insurance, about people who pay for it, who do the right thing, who are following the rules and are still being bankrupt and all these horrible things.
He almost needs to make a sequel for the pharmaceutical company.
Exactly.
Yeah, interesting.
Um,
Now you've done all this comedy, and one of the things I'm always fascinated in terms of editing comedy. I mean, editing in general is about pacing and timing and rhythm. And when it comes to comedy, a lot of the actors are coming from stand up, and a lot of the actors are coming from, improv. And each one has their own unique sense of timing, right? Like I think about Kristen Shaw, who we were talking about before we started, and her sort of sense of timing is really interesting. But then you work with Awkwafina, who's almost like really rapid and fast. And then, you got the new show on HBO, Hacks, which is got two different actors who have two different timings. How do you approach editing when you have a scene like that where the actors can actually sort of almost force the pacing in one way, but you need to, make it more serious or make it more jovial or whatever way you have to go?
I think in a lot of ways, I think of myself almost as like a chameleon where I have to kind of blend in with like the good stuff that's already there. You want to go with the grain, not against it. So if, and it's also about absorbing other, like these very talented comedians, like other work, right? So you get a sense of their strong suits and what's working and what's like the best of their material. Because you're not trying to change what they do. You're trying to bring out the best of what they do and the best things that work for their character and their story in, a season or an episode usually. I've done a little bit of stand-up specials, but not a ton. And so I just try to keep an open mind that, I'm here to collaborate. I'm not here to like force something different that doesn't work for them or their material or their pacing.
Interesting. So like you've also done, like you mentioned talking about improv performers. So in that situation, you're getting all these different sort of takes. What are some of the challenges you find with that?
There's a lot of good stuff. And there's a lot of stuff that it will make you laugh so hard, but it might not be the best choice for the scene. And I think that is something I always go back to. It's just like, what is the story we're telling? What are the emotions of the character in this scene? Like those fundamentals are really important when it comes down to making your final choices. Now, luckily, I work with people who, trust me, but also like trust that maybe in the beginning I'll show them way more than we need, but it's all sort of within range, hopefully. And then, a lot of it too is like seeing what people react to when they're in the room, which has become like a little bit of a challenge when working over Zoom. Like I sort of have lost hearing the laughter as I'm playing footage for them, but at least in the video side, you can still kind of feel what they're feeling in the moment, what they're responding to in the moment. And like a stand-up comedian in a way, like you are responding to the laughter. That's how you tweak your set as a stand-up, right? So that's how we also like re-edit the scenes in a way. Like, where is it hitting? How is it hitting the hardest? How can we shape this to be better and like have the timing really gel?
Now, is there, because you mentioned having to cut out parts that are really funny, is there something you've had to cut in your career that you're like, oh, that's so funny, but I can't use it, that you can tell us about?
Um, I mean, this is one, some shows do air things online, like Broad City would always have us do some extras, which I love that they release that. Something that's never been released is Tiffany Haddish on the Last O.G. always used to give shout outs to the editors before and after takes. She would just, ask us how we're doing, hoping that we're having a good lunch and like thanking us and singing to us. Like it was super magical and special when sometimes you feel so isolated in the edit room.
She knows how to get more screen time.
Yeah, she knows exactly what she's doing. Doesn't matter. I still appreciate it. And I, appreciated her making me laugh even harder.
She is fantastic. She's one of my favorites right now to watch.
Yeah, absolutely. She is such like a sweet person and she's so talented and I think she's killing it and going to be for a very long time.
Yeah. And she's earned it for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now you mentioned, being isolated in the edit suite, and for the show Hacks, if I'm not mistaken, when I was researching, everything was sort of set up during the pandemic.
Yeah.
How did this work? How did you get involved, and how did you edit from a distance?
Well, I've been collaborating with Lucia and Yellow and Paul W. Downs for about 5 years. So that was how I initially got involved. And then Jen Statsky and I both worked on Broad City, but Hacks was the first time we got to work together directly. So it was sort of an organic, like kind of the usual, like they check in on my schedule, and thankfully, the freelancing gods had everything align that we could work together. But it was really interesting. Like we started with a remote setup over a VPN. This is like a little technical, but that wasn't the greatest setup. So we moved over to local drives at a certain point. I think now, almost a year later, the technology has gotten way better, and like the editors have figured out the best workflow. But this was, we started in November of 2020. So it was fairly new in terms of having editors get going again.
Mm-hmm.
Working over Zoom is a challenge. Like you're kind of running two computers. You're running your laptop that has Zoom, and then you're also running your Avid edit system. But you kind of get used to it. Like, you're DJing, you're playing it down for everyone, and you're like trying to keep the conversation flow.
Mm-hmm.
But again, which I mentioned earlier, I do miss having people in the room. I think that you feel so much of like how people are responding, even if they like just move in their chair at a certain point, like that means something to me. And so it did take a little extra communication on everyone's part to get across like what we were creating and what we wanted to create and see and feel. But thankfully I went in with already having a shorthand with Lucia, and they trust me, which I really appreciate. So, it could be worse, honestly. Like, I think in a way, the editors obviously like have a little cushy position in the pandemic overall.
We lucked out.
Yeah,
Sure.
yeah, we sort of did.
They were like,
I
"Hey, can you
mean,
guys be alone for a while?" And we were like, "Yeah, sure."
yeah, no problem. Like, I'm ready. I've been doing this for years.
Now, in this, I'm intrigued by the story and the story arc for this one, bringing in this young comedian. How involved are you in this case? Because you've worked with these creators before, in shaping the story. Like, where does the script end and you, as the editor, begin?
I mean, I think for me on any project, the final draft of the script is done when we picture lock. And like that's always how I've looked at editing. I think that's ultimately what you are helping them achieve.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I did appreciate on this project, they would ask my opinion on other episodes the other editors were working on. Especially at times when they needed to make trims or questioning if they should. Thankfully, HBO was like very lenient in terms of running time.
Mm-hmm.
But I think every show is a little different. Like some I have a very extreme hand in shaping.
Mm-hmm.
The Last O.G season 1 is one of those cases where I literally touched every episode, just to kind of like do a makeover on that season. But so it just like some things are easier than others. So thankfully there was no massive overhaul that was needed on Hacks, because honestly, I think they spent a lot of time on the scripts, and I think that having the majority of the directing done by creators, like all of those things really helps you achieve something that has like a flow and a cohesiveness.
Now, you've been nominated for an Emmy, and now if this was, acting or directing, they would be sending out screeners that say like for your consideration, the crying moments. So like, what would you say for those voters? It was a challenge on the episode you had to edit that shows, why you should be the winner.
Okay, well,
let's get this out there so you can.
All right, let's do it. No, I would say one that I love editing pilots, and I do many of them for a reason. I think that they, you're really helping the creators hone the performances, the tone, the rhythm, and the characters, like what they should be, and you're setting the guidelines for the rest of the season. But I think within the pilot in particular, the part that really excites me the most is the sequence once we get to the sit down interview with Ava and Deborah until the ending. Mm-hmm. I think that is the most interesting part of the pilot. And it's funny because it's almost like where the pilot quiet down a little bit. Like you spend a lot of time in the beginning, like popping in and out of their lives so much, but then we're like just sitting with them and living with them. And I think that is, it takes a lot of effort in a way to make that captivating at times. And in terms of their story, it's like they both start that interview thinking they don't need each other, even though they've both been deemed irrelevant to the world. And they don't want to be there. And then after, a certain amount of conversation, they're starting to go toe to toe with each other. And I think in a way, like Ava is calling Deborah out on things that most people don't, because she's a comedy legend. She's at this what she thinks is an untouchable place. And, Ava is trying to wake her up to the reality that isn't true. And then I think Deborah is looking at Ava like, you need to get thicker skin. Like, if you really want to make it, like, you got to keep going and you got to get better. And like, that's how you win.
Yeah. Well, she's like, you got to claw and you got to keep clawing.
Exactly. So, and the turn for me, like Jean Smart's performance and her turn into like, thinking she doesn't need Ava to like literally being aroused by the idea of having another comedian around she can go toe to toe with is, I think, really special. And I think that we build their chemistry in that part of the pilot, with Jean changing her mind, chasing Ava down in her car, them working out a joke together immediately. Even though Ava is like in total shock in that scene of like, what is going on? But like Deborah realizes like, I do need this. And this is lighting me up again. It's like giving me life. I feel like when I'm around this person, I'm no longer on cruise control, which is what I was accused of earlier in the pilot. So that it leaves you thinking like, what is going to happen next with these two, which is like what you want. You want people to want to keep watching. And I think if the pilot doesn't make your like skin vibrate, then you're not doing your job correctly.
Now we'll have to put a thing underneath that just says for your consideration as you say that.
Excellent. Totally cool.
And I would say pilots are probably the toughest thing to edit because, like you said, you're trying to make sure you're set up the story for the entire series.
Yeah.
And there's, it's the first time everyone's gotten together. Everyone's trying to work through everything. So it's one of the tougher ones for sure.
Yeah. And I think too, like the other challenges, like making the pilot as good as the rest of the episodes. And a lot of times, sadly, they fall short, but I don't think that's the case with Hacks. I mean, I think it's one of the strongest episodes, which is like an incredible achievement because it really is so hard to pack in all the information plus follow like a traditional episode style at the same time.
Now, I have two more questions for you. One, I understand if you don't want to answer it, but I've seen a lot of backgrounds in my interviews, and you have a lot of photos in the background. I mean, like I have my daughter's work behind me. Whose artwork is that?
So this is an archive of my husband's grandfather's hand painted movie posters.
Whoa.
So here, this is Mystery of Mr. X, for
Holy
example.
crap, that's amazing.
So he used to work at a theater in Stamford, Connecticut, a Capitol theater. And, you know, it was that was his job. Movies would come out and he would illustrate these posters and hang them up in the theater every week. And thankfully, he took photographs of all of his posters. So this is, although we've tried to track down an original poster with no luck, but this is what we have. And over the pandemic, actually, my husband finally had time to make like a photo book of all this and scan them all, which is really cool for his family to have.
It is movie posters, like the old hand-drawn ones are really hard to find. Like I'm not a collector, but I know a few, and like they're searching old cinemas, like tearing down walls to see if they're hidden behind it.
I know.
It's crazy.
Well, if you ever hear of anyone finding some in Connecticut, please call me.
I don't know, you know, not that he has his phone number, but the guitarist from Metallica is a huge obsessed with film posters.
Oh, I did not know that.
You should call him. You give him a
shout.
Yeah.
Cool. I'll do that.
Now, my last question is just a fun question. We've been stuck in this pandemic for over a year now, and it feels like we're about to hit a fourth wave. People are starting to get a little nervous. What, in that time, everyone sort of became obsessed with streaming services. So is there a show or a movie you discovered during the pandemic that you think people should check out?
Yeah, I think people should watch Billy Piper's series, I Hate Susie.
Oh, okay. What's
Have you seen that?
No, I haven't. I'm assuming it's about Susie and
yeah, it's about an actress who basically has a nude / sexual photo released of her on the internet, and it basically explodes her marriage. And so it's about how she deals with it, and it's a really fun blend of drama and comedy.
Oh wow, I'll definitely have to check that out. Well, thank you so much for letting me interview.
Yeah, thank you.
And that's it for our show this week. Make sure to check out filmmakeru.com for our latest courses, and of course follow us on Twitter at filmmaker_u. And on YouTube, hit the subscribe button for our weekly videos. I want to thank our guest again, Jessica, for coming here. And of course, our sponsors, OWC. You can go to owcdigital.com for all your filmmaking and computer needs. I'm Gordon Burkell. Thanks for watching.